Welcome to the course where we will be understanding how do we make use of the MITRE ATT&CK framework for SOC defensive purposes and assessment of the Security Operations Center. In this course, we'll be understanding how do we make use of the MITRE ATT&CK framework for evaluating the Security Operations Center's effectiveness. We'll be understanding how do we identify the detection gaps in our environment, how do we evaluate the effectiveness of the existing controls, and most importantly, implement controls that are data driven, meaning that we'll be implementing controls that actually make sense to our environment, not just copy paste from a vendor or anybody else. In this course, we will begin with understanding what the MITRE ATT&CK framework is, what are the analytical models that we could use for evaluation of the SOC, and then we'll be using the various aspects of evaluating the effectiveness of our SOC, and we'll be starting understanding how we could leverage on threat intelligence to identify what is the effectiveness of our SOC. We will go on to map the existing controls with the known threat advisory, threat actors. We will go ahead and implement detection, identify what are our detection mechanisms, and move on to visualizing the overall picture of where do we stand and what are our target controls, or what are our target detection mechanisms. Moving ahead, we'll be understanding how do we implement the active and passive or defensive controls when it comes to addressing the adversaries. How do we combat these known threat actors? And we will also be evaluating how do we go ahead and find out the unknowns, wherein we know that there's a threat actor exists, but what are their new TTPs? We'll be using the SHIELD framework, or the latest one, the ENGAGE framework by the MITRE folks, to understand what are the newly discovered or what are the newly utilized TTPs by a threat actor apart from the known ones. And then finally, we will wrap up the course by understanding how do we implement the cyber analytics repository from the MITRE folks to implement controls beyond the traditional use cases. How do we go ahead and make use of the repository to build new mechanisms of detection? And we will be also looking at how do we make use of the MITRE ATT&CK framework for threat hunting purposes and address the crown jewel of an organization, the Active Directory. How do we implement defenses against the exploitation of Active Directory? What you need to be aware of in order to take this course is you have to have a solid understanding of the Security Operations Center and what a Security Incident and Event Management Tool, or SIEM, is. And you should have working knowledge of various types of logs, because we'll be looking at the logging mechanism as well, and understanding logging is important when it comes to working with SOC. And you should have a fair idea of what the defensive security tool is, are, for example, an firewall or an EDR or antivirus. So you just have to know the basics of what defensive security tools are, and various understanding of what are the various attacks that are possible on organizations. For example, exfiltration over DNS, exfiltration over HTTP. So various methodologies like these. Who is this course intended to? It's intended to anybody who is working in the SOC, irrespective of the levels 1, 2, or 3, the managers or the folks who are responsible for being the first line of defense when it comes to protecting an organization, the CTI analysts, the auditors especially, and the detection engineers in particular, who are responsible for identifying the actual gaps in an environment and building countermeasures in order to detect these gaps. And anybody who is working in SOC or is involved in security operations or the first line of defense of an organization. I hope to see you inside the course, and we will be going through a lot of material, and we'll be understanding how do we make use of the freely available MITRE ATT&CK framework for evaluating our SOC and understanding where do we stand from a defensive perspective.